I'm Ann Bocock, and welcome to Between the Covers. My guest is New York Times best-selling suspense author and winner of the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction, James Grippando. His latest novel marks the 25th anniversary of his signature character, Miami attorney Jack Switite. Grippando is a master of the legal thriller genre, and the subject matter of his latest book couldn't be more timely. Please welcome the author of The Girl in the Glass Box, James Grippando.
Thank you.
The 25th anniversary of Jack Switite. So let's let that sink in for a moment. We'll go back to 1994, if I've done my math correctly.
Right.
With The Pardon.
Right.
At any point where you're creating this character, did you think, oh, I think he'll stick around for 25 books?
I didn't think he'd stick around for 2 books, to be honest with you. And I'm not being flip there at all. I did not write The Pardon with the intention that it would become a series. And I give all the credit to my editor, Carolyn Marino, who, another milestone. This will be, The Girl in the Glass Box will be the last book we did together. She's moved on to another chapter in her life. And so yeah, I had the same agent, same editor, same publisher for 25 years of my career and 27 novels. But it was Carolyn back in 2001, after I'd written 5 novels without Jack, who we started getting emails and letters from people saying, whatever happened to Jack? Because The Pardon introduced him. He was young. He was only 27, 28 years old in the book. He was ideological. He made a lot of rookie mistakes, frankly. You know, he was not the sharpest lawyer around the block, or at least he wasn't the most experienced. But he took on very important cases. He was doing death penalty work, which he had a passion for.
In the first case was the death penalty case.
In the first book. And people wanted to know what happened to him. So we brought him back in 2002 in a book called Beyond Suspicion. And there are now 15 in the series with The Girl in the Glass Box. So
I think you're onto something now.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. You know, I think he'll be around for a while too. I mean, he's still now only in his. I haven't aged him exactly in real time, so he's in his 40s at this point. And so we'll see Jack for a few more novels.
All of your readers are happy to hear this. Now, I know you would prefer if we read all of them, but you don't have to read them in order to understand. Right. The story in any particular book and in The Girl in the Glass Box. Did you have a crystal ball? Because what this story is about, now let me backtrack a bit.
Yep.
I know it takes a while to write a book. You don't just see a headline and then
right.
a book comes out.
Right.
But this book immigration is front and center. When did you start writing this book?
So I started writing this in 2000, either late 16 or early 2017. I'm going to say, no, wait a minute. I delivered it in June of 18. So I started writing it sometime in 2017.
So you did have a crystal ball.
Well, not exactly, because this is the first time it's ever happened to me. I do try to write timely novels. But what I do not do is the ripped from the headlines thing, where you see it in the headlines one day and then, then it's on Law and Order, 3 weeks from now or something. I don't do that. What I try to look for are forces at work in society, in culture, in government, whatever, where I think there's going to be a flashpoint. And I saw immigration as one of those. And so I actually started this novel more about a story about domestic violence, international domestic violence, but then found out that a lot of victims of international domestic violence were seeking asylum in our country because their governments would not protect them from abusive husbands, because the basic posture of the government was, he's your husband, work it out. And so they applied for asylum, and I thought, well, that's interesting and got into the research angle of it and discovered there was one case.
There was a landmark case, what, 2014 or 15?
2014, there was one case in which a woman had been granted asylum based on the fact that her own government of Guatemala would not protect her from domestic violence. And I thought, well, that's an important case, and that's an important point for people to know. So I wrote a novel based on that pretty obscure decision. And literally the week I delivered it,
I mean,
the law changed. Jeff Sessions issued an executive order saying that is no longer the law of the United States. And apart from the whole issue of whether he was legally correct, I'm crushed because I'm like, I just delivered a manuscript, you know, with based on the laws, and that had never happened to me with all the timely subjects that I've addressed in all of my novels. I've never been stuck in a situation where the law just completely changed when I submitted the manuscript.
in the book, in The Girl in the Glass Box, you paint such an interesting picture of someone who is leaving their home country because of domestic violence and other violence, and this trip that they're coming here. Now, the odds are really stacked against them. How often does it work that they can actually get asylum?
Right. Not very often. And that is why, I mean, you're not going to read The Girl in the Glass Box and be encouraged about the status for the immigration system in our country. It's a broken system. That said, I really wanted the story to be about the people. And less about, the last thing I wanted it to be was about the politics of immigration, that's for sure. I couldn't help having it be somewhat about the system of immigration we have because Jack is a lawyer, so that's his viewpoint. In every novel Jack Switite novel that I write, it's viewed through the eyes of a lawyer. So he had to work through an unfamiliar system and learn about it in his effort to get asylum for a woman who would be killed by her own husband if she went back to El Salvador. I thought that our immigration system would have a sympathetic ear to that grounds for asylum, but you know, there's so many things wrong with it, and I don't even begin to suggest that I have all of the answers to fix it. But I think it's a story of human suffering and tragedy, and so it's ripe for a novelist.
Absolutely. In this story, you have Julia Rodriguez, who is the undocumented worker here, who has come because she is just trying to leave this abusive situation, and she brings with her her teenage daughter, Beatrice. Now, Julia, I found to be a very complicated character. She did some things that were not always in her best interest.
Yeah, you know, and I think when you're under that kind of pressure, that's realistic, right? I mean, she's trying to do the right thing for her daughter. She's acting mostly out of fear, you know, think about it. You're coming to a country, and she's in Jack Switite's hands. She doesn't know who Jack Switite is. All my readers do because they've, you know, most of them have read at least one or two of the novels before, so they trust Jack. But Julia doesn't, and neither does someone who comes to this country and puts themselves in the hands of a lawyer who's making life and death decisions for them. So all of that's very real, I think, from her standpoint. And maybe she doesn't make the right decision all the time, but I think you can understand why she trips up. There's so much at stake for her. You know, one of the first things I looked at was, because I'm not an immigration lawyer. I mean, I've practiced law a long time. I'm not an immigration lawyer. But there's a 1922 decision by Justice Brandeis, and Justice Brandeis is one of the most respected Supreme Court justices we've ever had. And the quote from the case was something along the lines is that a person facing deportation stands to lose not only life and liberty and property, but everything that makes life worth living. And that's a Supreme Court justice who wrote that in an opinion. And those words stuck with me, and that's sort of what informed me as I was trying to create this character, Julia. It's not just about those buzzwords of life, liberty, and property, but it's about everything that makes worth life living.
We didn't get to the part where how Jack gets involved in this, which I think is kind of sweet, and that's his backstory. His abuela, his grandmother, insisted that he is going to take this case.
Yeah, you know, people sometimes forget that because Jack is a bit of a gringo in the book, but he is half Cuban. His mother died not long after he was born, and she was born in Cuba. So Jack was raised by his father and stepmother, who had nothing to do with Cuban culture. So, and I think that people sometimes who read The Girl in the Glass Box, they're forgetting that Jack is half Cuban, right? And so I'm writing it from the standpoint of a guy who never knew his mother, whose mother was sent from Cuba to Miami at the age of 17 without her mother on something called the Pedro Pan program, right? It was parents who spirited away their children when Castro came to power, and it was better for them to live with relatives in freedom in Miami than to stay behind and stay with their biological parents in Cuba. So Abuela didn't get to Miami some 30 years later. Jackson is 30 the first time he meets her. And so it is, so I thought that was an appropriate way to introduce this case to Jack and the story to the reader to remind them of Jack's roots and how would he feel, having had all the privileges of being a citizen of this country, but being suddenly reminded that his mother was basically a refugee.
There's a point in the book where Jack and Theo, who is really his sidekick in the story, find themselves traveling. They have to travel to San Salvador.
Yeah.
Well, that is not, after reading this, that is not going to be on anyone's bucket list to go there. I mean, what you wrote about the clandestine mass graves and the violence, it was not a nice trip.
No, it's a tragic situation there. You know, when you think about it, and you don't really need to know much more than this. I mean, we've all now heard of MS-13 and the gangs and how they rule, but El Salvador is a country the size of Massachusetts and basically the population of South Florida. And every 9 hours, a woman is murdered.
Every 9 hours.
A woman, not just, I mean, so that's, 1,000 a year. And so I don't know what the statistics are here, but it's first of all, it's usually not women who are the victims of homicides. And it's certainly not every 9 hours. And so imagine if we were here, we're picking up our newspapers, and every 9 hours finding out that a woman in an area the size of Massachusetts was being murdered. It's unbelievable. So my wife did not let me go to El Salvador. You know, if that was going to be your next question.
That was going to be my next question. And your wife is very smart, so okay.
Yeah. And I have traveled to some dangerous places. I mean, I traveled, when I did a book about kidnappings in Colombia when FARC was in power, and that was really their main way of financing their war, their revolution, was to kidnap people, and they'd keep them kidnapped in the mountains. And so I made that trip. But I guess there comes a point in time where you weigh the pros and the cons. And I think you can write what you know without necessarily having to set foot in one of the most dangerous places on earth. So, yeah.
For anyone who may not understand, this book is a thriller. No question, it is a thriller. Yes, there is an immigration story, and immigration, as we know, is terribly complex. You have been an attorney for how many years now?
Wow, since 1984.
You're not an immigration attorney.
No.
Did you poll your colleagues, or where did you get this feel for the legal part?
Yeah, I love learning about new things. In every book that I write, I sort of just dive into it. Now, we do have an immigration lawyer at our firm, so that was sort of my go-to person whenever I got stuck on something. But part of the experience of learning about the immigration process as a writer really translated nicely into Jack's experience, because as you mentioned, Jack took the case because
And he's
his
not an
abuela,
immigration attorney either.
Right.
Okay.
His abuela said, you got to help this person, you got to do the right thing. And so a lot of that feeling of that Jack has in the book, of feeling like, wow, this is an area full of landmines, and I don't know this. I'm a good lawyer, but I don't know any of this. I sort of felt the same thing as I was learning about immigration law.
You won the Harper Lee Prize for fiction, and this is to recognize books that show the role of attorneys in society and how this translates. All right, first of all, how proud are you to have won that?
Yeah, that's really the pinnacle of my career. I don't know how it gets any better than that. You know, I've read To Kill a Mockingbird in high school, even sooner than high school, probably middle school, again in high school, college. I use it in my course that I teach at University of Miami on law and literature. And to find out that, first of all, it's really an honor because Harper Lee commissioned this prize. It's not something that somebody created after she was gone. She actually decided this was an important thing to do. And even better, because she was part of it, she signed about 50 copies of To Kill a Mockingbird. So when you win, the best thing about winning the award is you get a signed copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, which is pretty remarkable.
Okay, I have chills now.
Yeah,
That is a great honor. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You just mentioned that you, in addition to writing 27 plus books and being an attorney for all these years, you're also teaching a class, a law class, a literature and law class. What is the curriculum?
So we study, it's my view of law is that law is a search for the truth. So the premise of the class is that law and literature should be a search through literature for the truth in our world of alternative facts and fake news. And that resonated with the kids because if we put, law and literature on the syllabus, and they're already, reading more than they probably care to read because they're in law school. I mean, you're burdened. So, but when I put it in that context as a search for the truth in a world of fake news and alternative facts, I got a great response. And we study some classics, but I take a very, very broad view of literature, from Bob Dylan protest songs to nonfiction, Truman Capote, to Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. And it's been I've always wanted to teach. So that was my one thing. If I had a regret in my life, is that I didn't do this about at least 10 years ago. What
is it like being in this classroom with these young law students as an author? Are you getting anything from them as to, one, what kind of readers they will be?
Right.
And I assume that you have to be truthful, and they would that's what they would demand.
Yeah. So the first thing I learned was that a lot of my assumptions about what they have read, these are 24, 25-year-old students, my assumptions about what they had read were completely wrong. I got up, I was debating. See, I consider a book like Mutiny on the Bounty to be a legal thriller. If you skip to the end of the book where there's these great trial scenes, right? Everybody forgets that, but there's these. Okay, so I start talking about that, and I get these blank looks, and I'm like, "So you guys haven't read Mutiny on the Bounty?" And they're like, "What?" And I'm Fletcher Christian, Captain Bligh, any of that ring a bell? No, never heard of it. Never heard of it. So I had to, that was, a sort of adjustment number one. Number two, it made me realize some of my cultural references and jokes and humor were really way outdated. So I'm learning more from them than they're learning from me in some ways.
Are they readers? Were they readers? I mean, maybe they're not reading what you thought, but...
Yeah. So, and the first day of class, I tell them, okay, this is my goal in that class, is that I don't ever want anyone in this room to become that lawyer who knows nothing about anything except what he or she happens to be working on at the moment. And I've met those lawyers. They don't read. They don't watch television. They don't go to the movies. They don't even pick up a newspaper, you know. So I want them to have, you know, to read for pleasure. That's my main objective with the class. Now, that was exceeded by far, because there were students in my class that write poetry, they've written short stories, they want to write a script. So it was heartening to see that there not only was a demand for this class, but an underlying passion for reading and writing.
And you'll continue with this?
Absolutely, yeah.
There are quite a few really good authors that were and are attorneys. Is it that a litigator, by nature of what they do, is a storyteller?
I think there's some truth to that, sure. You know, not every trial lawyer can sit down and write a novel, but most, I mean, basic rules of courtroom, you know, you got to know your audience, right? So you're speaking to a jury. You have a limited amount of time in which to present a compelling case. The judge isn't going to give you, James Michener length book to present to the jury. You've got to get it down, right? You know, so there's a lot of skills that transfer over, without a doubt, and I think also that it is that lawyers are we all get labeled as lawyers, but we're really a very diverse group of people, right? I mean, I've met lawyers who are scientists and lawyers who are artists and lawyers, you know, who are musicians and so forth. So yeah, I mean, it seems like there's an awful lot of lawyers who've made that transition from lawyer to author. But I think that the truth is that we're just a diverse group, so that's natural that that's going to happen.
But you're a storyteller, and very little of your book is in the courtroom.
True, yeah. You know, well, that's one thing. When young people come up to me and say, I want to be a writer, I'll ask them, my first question is, well, what are you reading? And oftentimes their reaction will be, well, so for English, I have to read. I'm like, no, I didn't ask what you have to read. I asked, what are you reading? And oftentimes the answer will be, well, I'm just so busy. There's really nothing. And I'm like, I can't help you. You know, I can't help you be a writer if your answer is, I'm too busy to read for pleasure. And I say the same thing to lawyers who say, I got this great story. I know if I write it, it'll be a bestseller. And when's the last time you read a novel? Well, let's see. I graduated from college, and so it's like.
All right, so here you were, let's say 25 plus years ago, had a great career. What was it that you said to yourself, well, now I think I just want to write?
So it was really what was going on. If you want to play a little trivia game, the most popular television drama of the late 80s was, can you guess?
Well, there was a lot of law dramas.
A lot of Law and Order.
Oh, Law and Order, absolutely, which is still on the air.
And then came along L.A. Law, and either arrogantly or naively, I decided I can do that, and so I started writing a novel and spent 4 years doing it.
So what's the conversation like with your family when you come home from your law practice and go, I think I'm just going to be a writer now?
Yeah. And I wrote 2 novels while I was still practicing law, but I stopped practicing law. Our first child was born in July of '96, and I stopped practicing, went back 6 or 8 years later, but I stopped practicing to focus on the writing career full-time in September. And that's when people really thought I had flipped. And to this day, my mother breaks my life into 2 chapters, and that is when Jimmy had a job and when he went and did this legal thing. So yeah, not everyone was on board with it, but it worked out okay.
Can we end with a quick lightning round?
Okay.
I'm going to assume that the character you're most closely associated with and feel for is Jack?
Sure.
Okay. Your greatest influence, either literary or otherwise?
My mother.
Favorite book?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Favorite city?
Chicago.
Typewriter, laptop, pen?
Laptop.
A talent that you would like to have that you don't?
Play the piano.
The book is The Girl in the Glass Box. It is the 25th book featuring the signature character, Jack Switite. James Grippando, I want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for writing the book. I'm Ann Bocock. Please connect with me on the next Between the Covers. Thank you.